I saw an interesting article on the Forbes website recently. It was titled The Top Earning Dead Celebrities of 2021, right? Sounds like something you'd want to click on. And on the list were names like Bob Marley, John Lennon, Bing Crosby, Elvis, and Arnold Palmer. All people whose estates are still earning income. But I want to share, here were the top 5 that they noted. Okay, at number 5 was Dr. Seuss, $35 million. The author who gave us such classics as Green Eggs and Ham and How the Grinch Stole Christmas, believe it or not, sold almost 7 million print books in just the last year. Okay, number 4, another familiar name in the children's market, Charles Schulz, $40 million. And we're kind of coming into that time of year where it's almost time for It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, to air on TV. And Charlie and the rest of the Peanuts crew, they haven't slowed down. Okay, number 3 was Michael Jackson, $75 million. Okay, the king of pop continues to stand atop the mountain with over 1.3 billion streams of his music last year alone. That's amazing. Okay, then at number 2, another artist, Prince, $120 million. Another music icon of the 80s and 90s saw 3 of his heirs cash in on 43% of his estate, including rights to hit songs like When Doves Cry and Little Red Corvette. But listen, the top spot, which wasn't even close, may come as a surprise to you. Okay, number 1 was Roald Dahl, $513 million. The creator of children's classics like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, and James and the Giant Peach saw the Roald Dahl Story Company sold to streaming giant Netflix for a staggering $684 million. And just for some perspective, okay, this windfall for Dahl's company, it comes 31 years after he died of cancer at 74 years old. You see, it's amazing how people who are long gone can continue to have influence, to be relevant, be engaged by new generations. But listen, those names are nothing compared to the most influential life that has ever been lived, which few would argue against as being Jesus of Nazareth. And today we're continuing in our series, Christianity for People Who Aren't Christians. And I hope that you were encouraged or challenged by last week's question on who is God. We walked through this series knowing that these are questions our wider culture wrestles with when it comes to faith. And maybe followers of Jesus might just have some unresolved doubts as well. And our big question today is this: hey, what about Jesus? The reality is, so many in Jesus' day didn't see that influence coming. He was born in a small, obscure village of somewhat questionable repute, the child of a peasant woman. He didn't go to high school or college. He never visited a large city. In fact, get this, Jesus never traveled more than 200 miles from the place where he was born. He never wrote a book, never held a public office. And he was only 33 or so when the tide of public opinion turned against him, prompting even his closest friends to abandon him. He was then turned over to his enemies and was nailed to a wooden cross between 2 criminals. And while he was dying, his executioners gambled for his clothing, the only property he had on earth. And after he died, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of an acquaintance. And yet today, he is arguably the central figure of the entire human race. Right? His life even marks our concept of time. We call this year 2022 AD, which is Latin for Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. Okay? Anything before that is called BC, meaning before Christ. Okay? Even when people, want to get kind of super politically correct and they remove the Christian overtones, they call this the Common Era, and then the before the Common Era. But listen, it still is the life of Jesus that marks the divide. Okay, so let's dig in and look at what we know about Jesus. And the first thing actually connects well with history because, listen, there is no doubt that Jesus lived. No scholar, no matter where they stand on Christianity itself, denies that the man Jesus, the one the Bible talked about, existed in time and history. You find him listed in the writings of Thales, who was a first century Greek writer. Pliny the Younger, a lawyer and author of ancient Rome. Okay, the Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius, as well as the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus all account for Jesus. And of course, the most detailed record is found in the Bible. And that gives us not one, but 4 independent eyewitness biographical accounts written by the men Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. More than a few historians have noted that Jesus is the most documented life in all of ancient history. Okay, so we know he existed. We also know a few other things for certain. And we know that his teaching was of such a compelling nature that to this day, it's part of our cultural ethos. Whether it's such memorable lines as "do unto others as you would have them do unto you," or it's timeless stories like the prodigal son or the good Samaritan. Like, no one has been more spiritually or culturally influential. We also know that miracles were attributed to him. Okay, whether you buy into the possibility of miracles or not, people who witnessed his life said he did them. And we know that after a public ministry, he was sentenced to death through both a Jewish and then a Roman legal process. And we know that on the 3rd day after his execution, there was an empty tomb. You see, no one denies that. A stone was rolled away and the body was gone. Okay, even the Romans guarding it owned that. And we know that his followers went running around the landscape saying that Jesus had risen from the dead, and that they had seen him, they had talked to him, and that they had touched him. And this wasn't just one of the disciples making this claim, or even just a handful, but all of them. There are even records of groups numbering in the hundreds who witnessed the resurrected Jesus at the same time. After that first Easter, the Jesus movement exploded. By AD 100, there were around 25,000 followers. By AD 310, there were 20 million. And today there are billions, and it is the world's largest religious faith. You see, Jesus lived an influential life, and it's no wonder that we have questions about him. There was a survey done recently asking people their top questions about Jesus, and I want to look at some of the few of the common ones. And the first one, which was kind of a surprise, was this: what did Jesus look like? What did he look like? That was the most burning question that people had at the time. Do we even know what Jesus looked like? Okay, well, I'm not going to leave you hanging. Okay, the answer is both yes and no. Okay, first, the no part. The Bible never says that Jesus was 6'3", white, with blonde hair and chiseled good looks, like maybe you've seen in an old painting or movie. But listen, here's the yes part, okay? We do know that he wasn't white. He probably wasn't 6'3" with blonde hair and chiseled good looks. While there is not a single historical reference to the physical appearance of Jesus, and nothing in the Bible that describes his looks, okay, we do know that he was a Mediterranean Jew. So therefore, his skin would have had the olive darkness to it that you find in that region to this day. This also means that he didn't speak English, okay, not even King James English. Okay, sorry, he never uttered the words thee or thou. His native tongue was Aramaic. He would have been schooled as a boy in Hebrew and probably Greek, which was the common language of business and commerce. But when walking down the road, when visiting with family, kind of the everyday stuff of life, Aramaic was the language of choice. And being a Mediterranean Jew also meant that he probably wasn't overly tall, probably well under 6 foot tall. And according to the ancient prophecies surrounding the coming of the Messiah that Christians believe applies to Jesus, okay, he wasn't physically impressive at all. In fact, the prophet Isaiah wrote these words in the Old Testament of the Bible about the coming of the Messiah. This is in Isaiah 53, verse 2. There was nothing beautiful or majestic about his appearance, nothing to attract us to him. So the idea that Jesus was tall, dark, and handsome is only accurate on the dark part. And the earliest drawing that was ever made of him, at least the earliest that is still in existence, it dates all the way back to the 5th century. And the original hangs in one of the most ancient Christian structures on earth, St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert of Egypt. It's the classic picture of Jesus that has dominated ancient Christianity and continues to be displayed in many churches to this day. Here's what that picture looks like. And while ancient, we don't know if this is what Jesus really looked like. But what's interesting is that forensic anthropologists have tried to recreate what Jesus might have actually looked like based on the common skeletal remains of that era in that region. And the image that they came up with is not particularly flattering, but would fit the biblical prophecies as well as the distinguishing features of his actual ethnicity. Here is the picture that they came up with. But if you want to go all the way back, okay, the earliest possible image we have, and listen, it's hotly debated in terms of authenticity, but it's the famed Shroud of Turin. It is thought by some to be the shroud the body of Jesus was wrapped in following his crucifixion, and that miraculously carries his image to this day. Here's what that image looks like. But in truth, listen, we don't know what he actually looked like beyond being short, dark-skinned, and without any physical features that would have attracted us to him. Here's another common question. Okay, what did Jesus say about himself? Okay, here's what we do know about him, and it's the most important thing to know about Jesus. We know who he said he was. You can imagine the air around Jesus would have been electric. A mass miraculous feedings of thousands of people, healings from all kinds of diseases, even people being raised from the dead. So then as now, people wanted to know, who is this guy? Who was he? And in no uncertain terms, Jesus told them. Let me read you one of those recorded declarations. It's very direct, and it's in the gospel account of John chapter 8, starting in verse 48. The people retorted to Jesus, "You Samaritan devil, didn't we say all along that you were possessed by a demon?" "No," Jesus said, "I have no demon in me, for I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And though I have no wish to glorify myself, God is going to glorify me. You see, he is the true judge. I tell you the truth, anyone who obeys my teaching will never die." The people said, "Now we know you are possessed by a demon. Even Abraham and the prophets died, but you say anyone who obeys my teaching will never die. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are?" Jesus answered, "If I want glory for myself, it doesn't count. But it is my Father who will glorify me. You say he is our God, but you don't even know him. I know him. If I said otherwise, I would be as great a liar as you. But I do know him and obey him. Your father Abraham rejoiced as he looked forward to my coming. He saw it and was glad." The people said, "You aren't even 50 years old. How can you say you have seen Abraham?" Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth. Before Abraham was even born, I am." At that point, they picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus was hidden from them and left the temple. So who did Jesus say he was? Okay, this is extremely important to unpack. In this passage, he referred to himself as I am. Now that's either really bad grammar or he's trying to say something very significant. And listen, it was significant. The background of I am is found in one of the most famous stories in the Bible. The story of God speaking to Moses through a burning bush and giving him a big assignment. He had to go to the highest authority in the land, the Egyptian Pharaoh, and demand that he release all his slaves, who were the Israelites, God's chosen people. And Moses was understandably a little nervous. He wanted some credibility, so he asked God to tell him his name. And here's the answer that God gave to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. God replied to Moses, "I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you." Now return to what Jesus said when asked about his identity. Remember, he answered, "I tell you the truth, before Abraham was even born." Okay, what? I am. See, Jesus claimed the very name of the living God for himself. He said, you want to know who I am? I'll tell you. I am God. And the people listening understood him completely. There was no confusion here. They picked up stones to execute him because this was nothing less than blasphemy. Here was a mere man claiming to be God himself. But this mere man made that claim repeatedly throughout his life. Okay, here's just a few examples from the gospel accounts. Jesus said, "I am the Son of God." Also, he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Another, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said what? "I am." And another one, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." And that last verse is especially interesting, okay, because Jesus claimed that God was his Father, that he was the Son of God. And to be the son of someone in the way that Jesus is referring to here, meant to be of the same order or to have the same qualities of that person. So in Jesus, we have a person who walked the earth and claimed to be God. No other major religious figure has ever made that claim. Not Buddha, not Muhammad, not Confucius. Only Jesus made the claim to be God in human form. So the biggest question when it comes to Jesus is, what do you do with that claim? You see, there are only really 4 options we can have. So let's walk through them. The first is this. You can conclude that Jesus was a stark, raving lunatic. And maybe he did think he was God, but he was severely sick psychologically. And the problem is that in most cases of severe psychological disorder, the background of the person makes it very clear that they had a profile and history of mental illness. But listen, nothing in the historical record of the life of Jesus exhibits even a single sign of any of the classical manifestations of mental illness, such as the inability to relate to the real world, or inadequacy in personal relationships, or deficiencies in verbal skills. In fact, listen to this. Psychiatrist J.T. Fisher concluded that if you were to survey all of the psychological data that his discipline had to offer and boil it down into one essential and perfect prescription for mental health, it would be the Sermon on the Mount, the most famous single message Jesus ever proclaimed. Well, here's another choice. Is he is simply a liar. Okay, Jesus said he was God, but obviously he knew he wasn't. But this would be saying that the man whose teaching has set the standard for integrity and honesty throughout the civilized world was a habitual, premeditated, pathological liar. Even more important to remember is that Jesus was arrested, he was mocked, he was beaten and tortured horrifically prior to his execution, willingly. Jesus was offered a full pardon by the Roman governor Pilate. And if he would simply just deny his claim to be God, he would be out of that. If a con man could stop a nail being driven into the flesh of his hand by telling the truth, you would think he would. But Jesus never denied his claim to be God, though given every chance. The third option is to say that Jesus was just a good man, maybe even a prophet from God, but that's all. Not many people want to say that Jesus was a lunatic, and not many people want to say that Jesus was a liar. There really isn't any evidence of that, but they don't want to say that he was God in human flesh either. And so they land on him being simply a good man, a holy man, but no more than that. But there's a problem with this as well. C.S. Lewis once wrote about this idea, and Lewis, he was a brilliant intellect who journeyed himself from atheism to Christianity. And reflecting on this idea of Jesus being a good man, Lewis went after it and exposed how intellectually dishonest it really is. Let me read you some of his words. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, meaning Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on a level with the man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He's not left that open to us. He did not intend to. And you see, Lewis is right. Here we have a man who walked the earth and claimed to be God in human form. Okay, that's not neutral. You can say that Jesus was insane, that the man who has in the minds of many given the world its greatest picture of sanity was in fact a stark raving lunatic. You can say that Jesus was a liar, that the man whose teaching has set the standard for integrity and honesty in the civilized world was a habitual, premeditated, pathological deviant. Or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord, which is of course the last of our 4 options. But what you can't say is that Jesus was just a good man. No, Because of what he said about his own identity, he is either Lord or liar or lunatic. Okay? Take your pick. Now I know that you're probably thinking, time out. Listen, dead people don't rise. And listen, you're right, they don't. We know that now, and they knew that then. But listen, that's the point. If you have a hard time coming to grips with this, listen, you're not alone. Even Jesus' own disciples doubted the resurrection. In fact, one is known as Doubting Thomas. He still gets a bad rap today. But listen to how Jesus entered into his wrestling, how Thomas is wrestling with truth. This is in the gospel account of John chapter 20, starting in verse 24. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." There are two aspects of this story that I believe are so profound. Okay, the first is this: that followers of Jesus will have doubts. Thomas walked with Jesus. He saw every miracle he performed. He listened to his teaching and still had doubts about the resurrection. If you don't have it all figured out, that's called walking by faith. And the second aspect is my favorite, so don't miss this. Jesus didn't discard Thomas for doubting, but rather met him in that place. When Jesus appeared 8 days later, he specifically addressed Thomas, not to shame him, but to speak into his unbelief. And I believe Jesus still speaks into our unbelief today. You see, Thomas was able to physically see Jesus, examine the wounds in his hands and side. But Jesus promised something greater for you and me, a blessing on those who in faith believe that he is no lunatic or liar, not merely a good man, but the Son of God. That's who Jesus is. As I wrap up this message, I have just a few next steps for us. The first is become a follower of Jesus. But who do you say Jesus is? The beautiful thing is he didn't leave us in the dark on his identity. And as we looked at today, he claimed to be God. And his followers claimed that he not only died, but 3 days later he rose again. And that's what we believe today. All of Christianity and even how we view time hinges on his life and death. He longs for you and me to come to him. Listen to these words from Jesus in the gospel account of Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30 out of the Message translation. It says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." Listen, if that's you, I would invite you to come to Jesus. Receive the rest and life that he has accomplished on the cross. Let your home church leader know if you're making that decision today. We would love to pray for you and help you take next steps in what it means to follow Jesus. The last next step is this: look like Jesus. Though we may not know what Jesus physically looked like, the followers of Jesus or disciples are called to look like him. And you may think, man, that's unfair or that's impossible to do. But as we surrender our lives to Jesus and allow his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, to work in our lives, Jesus will be on full display. I think of these words from the Apostle Paul in a letter he wrote to the church in Galatia. This is Galatians 2, verse 20. "My old self has been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So I live in this earthly body by trusting in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." You see, the life that we live as followers of Jesus is not our own. It's Jesus Christ who lives in us and through us by the Holy Spirit. So lean into that. Invite him to work in your life, to be on display as you walk through your everyday life. I hope you've been encouraged by the questions that we've addressed so far. And we've got 2 more weeks, and I'm excited next week to dig into some of the labels that Christians have allowed to give Christianity a bad name. Hey, God bless Oasis.